I didn't expect that night to stay in my mind forever. It started off so simple, just a quiet evening, some snacks, and the sound of the TV murmuring in the background. Nothing about it was planned. Nothing about it was supposed to feel like a turning point, but it became one. It was a Saturday evening, and the sky outside had already turned a deep blue, streaked with silver as the moon began to glow. I had just finished showering, slipped into my usual oversized t-shirt and soft cotton shorts, and padded barefoot into the living room. Callum Hayes was already there. He was lounging on the couch, legs spread out comfortably, eyes fixed on the screen. A bowl of popcorn sat between us. I joined him, pulling my legs under me, not thinking too hard about how close we were. Callum wasn't a stranger. He was my friend's cousin, staying with us for a few weeks while his apartment got fumigated. We'd been around each other more lately, and I'd grown comfortable with his presence. Sometimes too comfortable. He was kind of quiet, but funny when he wanted to be, and okay, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed how attractive he was. Tall, messy brown hair, with a voice that dipped low when he talked about things he was passionate about, like music, or that film with a twist ending that he'd made me swear not to spoil for anyone else. He was the kind of guy who wasn't trying to be charming, but he was. That night, as I settled beside him, we didn't speak much at first. Just the rustle of popcorn, the shifting of legs, and the screen lighting up both our faces. A romantic comedy played, and somewhere halfway through, we both started laughing at the same line. I leaned into him just a little. I didn't think he noticed, but my shoulder brushed against his arm. It was barely anything until it wasn't. His hand had been resting beside him, his fingers lazily sifting through the popcorn. Then he reached for the remote, shifting slightly toward me, and his fingers grazed my thigh. I thought he would pull back. He didn't. And I didn't move either. The air changed in the room. Not all at once, but gradually, like a current that hums beneath the surface. I could feel it in the way he exhaled just a little slower. I could feel it in the way my own breath caught in my chest. Waiting. Wondering. His fingers lingered. Not heavy, not too much. Just enough. It could have still been accidental. A light touch. But something about it wasn't. He turned to look at me. I met his eyes for a fraction of a second and looked away just as fast. But that moment was electric. My heart fluttered, and my skin felt like it had come alive under his touch. I didn't say a word, and still I didn't move. I could feel his hesitation too, like he was reading me, trying to understand if the silence meant no, or maybe. I had never thought about us like this, at least not seriously. But now that it was happening, my mind was flooded with curiosity. His hand slipped again, this time across the soft skin just above my knee. I swallowed. Still watching the screen, he leaned a little closer. The warmth of his body beside mine made my skin tingle. I don't know if it was the film, or the fact that I had been so alone in my thoughts lately, but having him beside me like that felt dangerously comforting. I didn't mean to, he murmured suddenly, voice low and husky. I turned to him, just enough to see the look on his face. He looked uncertain, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that told me he wasn't exactly sorry. I bit my lip. I didn't tell you to stop. There. I had said it. A line crossed in silence, now put into words. He didn't speak again. He just looked at me, his hand still resting gently against my skin, and then he smiled softly. He turned back to the screen, but I saw the way his fingers brushed slightly upward, barely noticeable to someone else, but unmistakable to me. And I let it happen. That was the beginning of a quiet shift between us. We didn't talk about that moment the next day, or the one after. But something had changed. We moved around each other differently. He started spending more time in the living room when I was there. Sometimes, I'd catch him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And sometimes, I let myself imagine what might happen if we stopped pretending there was nothing between us. A week passed. Another movie night. This time, I wore something a little different, a tank top instead of a t-shirt, shorts that sat just a bit higher on my thigh. Not too much, nothing obvious. But I noticed the way his eyes briefly dropped down before meeting mine. We sat close again, our arms touching now and then. A shared laugh, a brush of hands as we both reached for the last piece of popcorn. That time his fingers didn't move away. They slid against mine, slowly, purposefully. He turned his hand so our palms touched, and I didn't pull away. It felt like every little touch was saying something neither of us had the courage to speak aloud. I could feel it every time he stood a little closer than he needed to. The way he leaned in when he asked me questions. The low timbre of his voice when he said my name. One night, the power went out during a storm. We lit candles, and the house was soaked in warm amber glow. I was wrapped in a blanket, sitting on the floor with him as the rain beat softly against the windows. It's kind of peaceful, I said. Yeah, he said, looking right at me. Especially right now. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, our faces lit softly by candlelight. His hand reached up and gently tucked a piece of my hair behind my ear. That was the first time his hand touched my face. I didn't stop him. He cupped my cheek for a moment and then let his fingers slide down to my shoulder, slow, gentle, careful. I was breathing shallow, heart pounding, but I still didn't say anything. When he leaned in, I thought he might kiss me. He didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Tell me to stop." But I didn't. I leaned closer. Not all the way. Just enough. Enough to tell him what he needed to know. When his lips finally met mine, it was soft. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't wild. It was warm, searching, like he wanted to feel the answer in the way I kissed him back. And I did. The blanket slipped from my shoulders. His hands found my waist, mine curled into the back of his shirt. We stayed there for minutes that felt like a secret world all our own. Eventually, we pulled apart. Not far. Just enough to breathe. His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel him smile. We never needed to talk about what had begun between us. It unfolded on its own. Slow, careful, full of tension that never needed to be loud. There were more nights like that. Moments when his hand would rest on my leg and stay there. Times when he'd brush against my lower back as he passed, letting his touch linger just a heartbeat too long. We were discovering each other in quiet ways. Ways that made my skin buzz and my breath catch. He knew how to make me feel wanted without ever crossing the line too far. It was all suggestion, and that made it even more powerful. Eventually, the night came when he told me he'd found a new apartment and would be moving out by the weekend. Something inside me clenched. I didn't want this to be over. He seemed to read it in my face. "I'm not going far," he said, "and I'm not planning to stop whatever this is." I smiled. Good. Because I don't want you to. His hand found mine again. Familiar now. Warm. And as we sat side by side, watching one last movie together on the couch, I leaned my head on his shoulder and let him hold me. It wasn't about a hand that slipped anymore. It was about everything we didn't say that still found a way to be known. And I wouldn't change a second of it.